Good evening, members. I think the time is 6:30 or just after, so sorry if we're running slightly late. Welcome to the Community Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting of Tuesday, the 1st of April. If we can start off just by going through the evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear end side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Item 2 is to note that the open proceedings of this meeting are being webcast on the internet. 3 is to receive apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Robert Taylor, Councillor Marks and Councillor Mrs Waldridge. Item 4 is resignations and replacements. I have Councillor Mrs Reid replacing Councillor Taylor, Councillor Mrs Tucker replacing Councillor Marks and Councillor Harvey replacing Councillor Mrs Waldridge. Item 5 is declarations of conflict of interest or whipping decisions. Councillor Mrs Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Just for completeness, really, I think I will declare that I'm a member of the Local Children's Partnership.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Declare that as well, but also declare I'm a governor of the Vine.
Councillor Mrs Tucker. Was it Councillor Cousins, did you?
Yeah, just as the governor of Kingsfell Infants and Juniors.
And Councillor Jones.
Just to inform you that I work in a school with 4 lanes infants. I don't know if it makes any difference.
And Councillor Mrs Reid again.
I'm so sorry, Chair. I suppose as we're talking about schools, I'm also governor at Hatchwell Infants.
Right. Item 6 is urgent items, and there are none. 7 is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I take those as read and accepted? Yes. Okay. Item 8 is member and public participation. I don't have any notification of that. Item 9 is the standing invitation to relevant portfolio holders to present reports of their activities and or bring forward policy development issues at an early stage. I do have the Cabinet Member for Community Services, Councillor Eachus, who I believe just wants to give us a quick couple of minute update from the last meeting that we had.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just literally 2 minutes just to update you all following the last meeting about the debt and high costs of credit. And just to confirm that I have met with officers, and officers are working extremely hard going through all the bullet points in the action plan that we agreed that have just been confirmed as the minutes of the last meeting. But in particular, one of the ones was using the Council's network to publicise and promote responsible lenders. So following that meeting, officers have included an advert signposting people to help and support in Basingstoke and Dean today. There is the use of community centres as a space for financial capability training. So officers are currently working with local community organisations to identify opportunities for financial capacity training, as well as enhance awareness of existing provision. That library computers should be restricted from accessing payday loan websites. Officers are working with Hampshire County Council to discuss what residents can access on public computers and any potential guidance that may be relevant. The website, officers have updated the website and the information relating to debt and the high cost of credit and have made them accessible from our homepage. So yeah, that's it for now, but I think you can probably agree that they've done quite a lot to date, and I can assure you they are continuing to do the work, and the full report will come back to this committee in a few months' time.
Thank you for that update. Item 10 is referrals from other committees or the Council. There are none. 11 issues referred by the Cabinet. There are none, which brings us on to item 12, and I will pass over to Councillor Mrs Osselton to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. I think if I stand up, you'll probably hear me a bit better. Tonight I'm going to introduce the Supporting Troubled Families programme, and I have Mike Penny and Gary, that I'll pass over to. I know Mike because I've worked with him for quite a long time. I do apologise, but I remember your name this time. The Supporting Troubled Families programme was launched by the government in April 2012 with the aim of turning around the lives of 120,000 troubled families nationally. Troubled families being those defined as involved in crime and antisocial behaviour, having regularly truanting or excluded children, or have an adult on out-of-work benefits. The first 3 years is intended to engage with 1,590 families across Hampshire and approximately 300 in the borough. The programme involves the development of a coherent multi-agency plan for each family and has an operational budget of 4,000. And I think in light of what has come forward today in the press, I think that development of a coherent multi-agency plan is extremely important. So 4,000 in the budget, as well as significant existing funding and resources to utilise. Hampshire County Council has commissioned an intensive family support service named Transform to work with the most complex families working intensely with low workloads. In BD&B, the local coordination group, here known as the LCG, have identified families for the first 2 years, 85 and 147 families respectively. A key worker or lead agency has been assigned to each family and 35 have been referred to Transform. Progress is encouraging and reward funding has been received for outcomes achieved in October, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more from our colleagues from Hampshire County Council on this. In October, the LCG successfully ran a week-long anti-truancy pilot with schools and parents, targeting families with home visits, health advice and truancy sweeps. In coming months, a strategic review will be undertaken on support to ascertain whether additional support is required. So a very comprehensive programme that is being undertaken in partnership with the Borough and Hampshire County Council. And if I can pass it on to you, Mike, you can, Gary, you're going to lead on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's probably our work done for us, because that very succinctly and eloquently covered most of the content of our update. Thank you, Chair, for welcoming us back to this meeting. Mike and I presented to you, it was about 12 months ago now, when the programme was really in its very embryonic early stages, and we were very clearly setting out on our ambition, direction of travel and where we wanted to be. And I think we're in the very fortunate position now to be able to report to you the progress that we've made over the last 12 months, and also the significant outcomes that this new way of working is delivering for some of our most complex and vulnerable families and communities across Hampshire and Basingstoke and Deane in particular. What I'm going to do today is just take you through some of the progress and then just hand over to Mike once we get away from the county level to just really give you an idea of how the programme is developing and being led locally within Basingstoke and Deane. So about 20 months ago when we set off on this journey, this was our overall tagline, and it was all around central government giving us a unique opportunity to improve the lives of families and communities, manage down demand and work in better coordinated and new ways to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of public sector spend on high cost families. We've really broken it down into 4 key areas. First and foremost, it's about improving outcomes and delivering lasting positive changes for these families that seem to constantly be cycling through high cost services, whether it's within police, whether it's within local government, whether it's within housing and so on. Secondly, it's about that greater interagency coordination, and we've touched on the importance of a single family plan. These families are known to all our agencies, and it's about pooling that information and knowledge and sharing that approach together and working more effectively in partnership together at the family level. It's about challenging and changing the way we work. And finally, as we're all having to do more with less across the public sector at the moment, it's about reducing the current and future costs of high need families on the public purse. These are the families that every single public sector organisation spends a significant amount of time and resources on, and so how can we more effectively manage that demand? In terms of numbers, there are 120,000 families that have been identified nationally. To put that within the context of Hampshire, we're looking at 1,590 families, which equates to about 5,000 children across the county, and that's 270 families within Basingstoke and Deane. It's estimated at central government that each of these families costs the public purse about £75,000 per year, and that's £190 million across Hampshire. Again, to put that within a local context, that's £20 million across the public purse that we're spending on 270 families within Basingstoke and Deane at the moment. So it's big numbers. Central government funding, DCLG there is Department of Communities and Local Government, which is our central government department, are funding £3.2 million over 3 years, plus about £2.1 million of reward funding. So for every successful family we can claim, it's giving us part of that £2.1 million of reward funding. The County Council has invested £1.4 million over the 3 years of the programme, but that's not to belittle the significant resource contributions from district councils, the Constabulary, Job Centre Plus and a variety of public sector agencies who all have a vested interest in this programme. Just very quickly, the national definition of these families, essentially they need to meet 2 out of 3 criteria relating to youth crime, having a child not in school or with poor school attendance, and having an adult and out of work benefits. But the important thing about this slide really is this bottom point. It's not about chasing the money. If a family is in need of better coordinated and more targeted support, they will be included within this programme and get the benefits that will derive from it. Just putting that visually, this is really where our troubled families cohorts sit within any hierarchy of need across any organisations. So this could be the police service, this could be a social care team, education, housing, health. But they are those families that are bubbling at the very top of that triangle and really circulating within that. They are the families that, as I said, cross-cut all our agencies, and we all have a vested interest in moving them down through that hierarchy of need. So this is our weather map of where those families are based on our Year 1 cohort, and you'll see some red over Basingstoke and Deane in the top right-hand corner of that map. At the very top right-hand corner is Aldershot and Farnborough. But these are the concentrations. There's no surprises. It mirrors our indices of economic deprivation. They are geographically concentrated in Hampshire's most deprived communities. Domestic violence and substance misuse are absolutely rife and prevalent within these families. 80% live in social housing. And importantly, they're already known to us. They are known to our youth offending teams, they're known to our children's services colleagues, they're known to adult services and across the public sector. And in terms of health, 70% of these families live in the top 30% wards for health deprivation and inequality. So we know these are our most unhealthy families as well. Our delivery approach, as has been touched on, we are commissioning a central intensive family support service, which is branded as Transform, to deliver services for our top 495 families, so our most complex families. And that service is based on a single key worker working intensively around a single family plan, and really being that single point of contact for both the families, but also the 6 or 7 or maybe 10 agencies who are contributing to the delivery of that family plan and getting that better coherence. The remaining 1,095 still have a single family plan and still have an associated lead agency, but don't get that single key worker from Transform. What's new about this approach and what are we doing that's different? It's putting the family at the centre of service delivery. So rather than designing our services around everything that we can deliver as our constituent partnership parts, this is about putting the family at the centre of service delivery and designing a plan that meets the needs of that family. And it sounds very simple, having one family, one plan and one joined up approach, but this new way of working is here to stay and it's delivering real benefits already. We have one accountable agency or professional leading that plan. We have significantly better information sharing. We all hold information about these families, whether it's in a health context, housing context, local government context. And it's about seeing that bigger picture around the whole family. So rather than the individual family member, it's the whole family and it's all the information we hold on that family. And then having that simple action plan around what will make the difference. Final point on this slide is around collective responsibility and recognising that we all have a vested interest with these families across the public sector, and it's making it everybody's core business to adhere to this way of working. Just want to say something about the progress at a county level before giving the stage to Mike to talk about progress within Basingstoke and Deane. But we have now identified 1,400 families. The slide there says 13, but it's taken at a point in time, and are engaging with over 1,000 families across the county. Approximately 250 families are now engaging with Transform, and we recently submitted 400 successful outcomes to DCLG in February 2014. There is a real tangible partner commitment across all partners, and that reflects very well in Basingstoke and Deane, and every single partner that you would expect to be at the table within Basingstoke and Deane is there and is committed to the programme and is contributing to the programme. And we are funding a variety of innovative projects which Mike will touch on, including the Anti-Truancy Week in Basingstoke and Deane. Finally, we are evaluating the programme independently with Portsmouth University, because I could sit here in a year's time and tell you it's all been fantastic and all been doing very well. But to give this way of working some credibility and independence, Portsmouth University will be reporting next year on how we've done, and also identifying those opportunities for how we can embed this way of working and continue the good work that's been started. So I'm now just going to hand you over to Mike Penny, who's the District Social Care Manager for Basingstoke and Deane, and leads the programme locally as the Senior Responsible Officer there.
Thanks very much for that, Gary. Just to go back on a couple of points that Gary made, and to give you some sort of real hard examples of one or two cases in social care. And we've got two particular lads that I often cite when Gary talks about numbers. Those two lads came to the attention of our social care teams many years ago. They're in their 20s now. But just out of interest, a little while ago, I went back through their career in the social care time, and looked at the places that they'd been and added up what they'd cost us in terms of a department for their care. It came to just over £5.4 million. Both of those lads, unfortunately, now are serving fairly long-term prison sentences, so the money that we spent on them wasn't particularly a very good use of public money either. But sadly, whilst they probably are the exception, they're not rare. There are many children that we take into care that their outcomes are not good, and this gives us a real golden opportunity to get in earlier rather than have these poor outcomes. Now, they're not all poor, they're not all bad outcomes, but we do have some of those that we could have done a lot better with if we'd have got in earlier. And just to reinforce that point that Gary made about a family plan, I can say this because as a social care manager, I'm responsible for social workers, and social workers traditionally work with things like child protection cases. And another example I'd just like to share with you is the way in which the social workers' thinking has got to change and is changing. Case of two children subject to child protection plans. The parents had made significant improvement that we were confident that had significantly reduced the risks whereby they could be removed from a child protection plan. But a couple of questions intrigued me that I asked the social worker before I agreed that that would be our recommendation is, are the adults in that family back at work? And is there any antisocial behaviour, and are the children going to school? And the answer to two out of those three things was, no, parents are not back in work. There's no antisocial behaviour, but the children's attendance at school is not particularly good. It's certainly under 85%. My argument back to the social worker was how can we judge that the change that you say they've made is permanent and sustainable if we've not improved the whole quality of that family's life? And the only way we're going to do that is by getting those parents back into work again. Therefore, their aspirations and their expectations will be raised, and therefore that will then fall on their children as well. So, didn't support that view, but made them think about, actually, whilst they've been working with this family for the last 12 months, they could have engaged the Department of Work and Pensions, they could have engaged other staff to improve attendance, and therefore that would improve the outcomes long-term for that family. So it's about, as Gary said, it's about making those whole system changes, getting people to think more generically, more widely about the whole family. And whilst I can do that for the staff that I'm responsible for and the services that I've got, my challenge to all those other agencies that I work with is that they do the same thing. we think more broadly. We don't think in silos. We don't think about this is just my responsibility. All these things are all our responsibilities, which is part of the challenge that we have in the group. And I have to say, in moving on, the local partnership approach and the identification of, sorry Gary, can I ask you to be the driver for a moment? All right, you're up there. It's been absolutely superb in Basingstoke. I think we've got a particularly strong and excellent history of collaborative working in Basingstoke and Dean with all the partners, which includes obviously Basingstoke and Dean officers itself. We've been particularly successful in year 1 and in year 2, as you can see there. So 91 families supported in year 1, 144 in year 2. We've far exceeded, and I hope Gary can back me up with this, other districts across the entire county. I think we've led consistently both in year 1 and in year 2, so we've got something to be very, very proud of. We've set the bar high, so in year 3 we've certainly got to maintain that. 34 families receiving additional intensive support, with 24 currently being engaged. We've got rewards that have come back, and Gary can work out the sums for me. Year 1, 28, year 2, 12. So what does that equate to, Gary, in terms of reward money? Doing sums, put him on the spot.
About 32,000.
32,000. But we've got significant amount of money that sits in the Basingstoke and Dean coffers that we can spend, that we can continue to use that to progress plans for families. But as Gary said, whilst that is there as an incentive and can legitimately be used to either purchase services and make differences to families in Basingstoke, it's not about chasing the money. What we're looking to do is just change the way in which we do things and the way in which we work. So in the next 2 or 3 years, when there's perhaps not that money, we continue to work in a collaborative way. The anti-truancy week was, I think, and certainly the head teachers of most of the schools will say, was very, very successful. Last year, people might remember we allocated a complete week we notified parents, we did a press release. This year what we decided was we would take 6 days over the next 12 months. This time we wouldn't inform young people and their parents. We would select days throughout the year. So it was a Monday a few weeks ago, and then a Friday. It will be a Tuesday and a Wednesday. Now, what's different about this is that it's slightly more targeted. What people may recall is the old-fashioned education welfare officers that would do truancy sweeps and what they called late gates. It was very, very general, very broad, and just captured everything. Basingstoke and Dean has not got a particular problem with truancy. It's as good as anywhere else, but you've still got a hard core of around about 2 or 3% of children whose attendance consistently falls under 85%, and in some cases down as far as 30 or 40%. They're the ones that are really, really challenging and difficult to shift. We decided our strategy was going to be trying to shift those, so we engaged schools in doing what we described as sort of checking, giving us the figures, giving us the names of those that are consistently late, consistently absent, phone those through to a central point, which was our offices in Vertex over at Chinham there, and there we'd have a team of staff, both social workers, community safety wardens, police officers, head teachers, health, so a whole team of people there that would make phone calls to parents, go and knock on doors, and then just to make sure that we'd swept everything up, around about 11:30, 12 o'clock, we'd all go for a wander around the town centre and mop up anybody else that should be there. The ambition that I've got is that somehow we transform and change society's expectations. Now, I confessed my sins to the group some time ago when I said I was one of those that played hooky from school. But I was hugely embarrassed, frightened to think I might get caught or somebody would put their hand on my shoulder. But don't feel these days that that's necessarily there. And you can walk into a shop and you can see kids being served sweets. Now, I can remember when I walked into a shop and the shopkeeper would say to me, shouldn't you be at school? Now I think society and the community also needs to share its responsibility and challenge children in an appropriate way and ask, why aren't you at school? And if we can get that change, and we can get society to change, if we can create expectations, the expectation is that you should be at school, and provide parents with the right level of encouragement and support, and at the same time, consequences as well, because as Gary quite rightly said at the beginning of all this, there are a very, very small minority of families that are costing us huge amounts of money, and therefore, do they have a choice about whether to engage with us or not? I don't think they do. I think that they have a right to ask us for help and support, but we also have a right to say to them, well, unless you accept that help and support, we have a right to confront and challenge you about that. So that's essentially where we've got, and the anti-truancy week is a really good example, I think, of all those agencies collaborating and working together to see real tangible benefits and outcomes. And in fact, the schools have commented on the progress that they've seen. We've had children that have all of a sudden discovered that they like school when the policeman's knocking on the front door and they're disappearing out the back door. We've had fairly amusing stories of police officers saying to parents, you know, why isn't your son at school? Well, he won't get off his Xbox. Well, what do you mean he won't get off his Xbox? Turn it off. No, I'm frightened of him. I can't turn it off. Well, take the plug off. Well, I can't take the plug off. You can take it off if you want to. So the police officer sort of put their hand in their pocket, came out with a sort of pocket penknife, removed the fuse from the plug and said, here we are, problem solved. He now doesn't have an Xbox. Now we know that will be, you know, probably repaired and sorted out, but the message is that, you know, we need to get back in control, and that's small, and I am emphasising it is a small minority of children who need to be in school, and we need to find ways of getting them there. There's a handout here, which I can hand around now or leave with yourselves to hand around, yeah. Whoops. Which sets out what we did, who the partners, how it was delivered, and some of the comments from some of the head teachers, other school staff. In addition to that, there's a case study here as well, which I'll send round, which again evidences and gives people sort of a good example of how we're working. I think that's probably the update for Basingstoke, and sort of happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just before I open up to questions, that was a really informative presentation, and I wonder whether any members, if possible, would like a copy of this presentation. Perhaps if we could be emailed it, it might be quite useful. Yeah? Okay. So, yeah, if anybody would like to ask any questions. Councillor Mrs Taylor.
Thank you. First of all, well done. It sounds like it's a good programme and it's working well. So I'd just like to say, you know, thank you for doing this. It sounds excellent. I've got two questions, if that's okay. One is very simple, the other one less so. So I'll ask the simple one to Gary and the other one to you, Mr. Penny. Is that right? Right. You just simply, you were talking about reward funding for successful families. Could you just give me an idea how that would be quantified? Does it mean that they no longer fill two of the categories? At what stage do you feel you can tick them off as being done?
I think there's two elements to that. In terms of financial criteria, it is exactly as you've described it. It's the inverse of the identification. So if a family meets the criteria because they're not attending school or the family member isn't in work, the outcome is around that attendance improving over a sustainable period of time, which is 3 consecutive school terms, or the family member being in work for more than 6 months, and that applies to the 3 criteria that are there. I think the important thing to say, though, is that's the outcome to tick the box on payment by results. But we all know that just because you ticked a box on an outcome for payment by results, there may still be significant issues with that family. And so no family drops off the radar just because we've ticked that box, and we continue to monitor. And when issues do escalate again, we are there to intervene at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you very much. The other question is, this sort of programme comes into the category of what I call driving the ambulance to the foot of the cliff. Vital work, and it needs to be done. Obviously, you're rehabilitating a lot of people, but obviously we do need to think of people at the top of the cliff, stopping people from dropping off. Just wondered, in my small experience, and I don't have a great deal, you can usually identify an emerging troubled family before they've had any kids at all. I just wondered if you can tell us of any programs or anything that you have in place which catches them early, which can actually prevent this sort of troubled family emerging. Thank you.
I think it's excellent timing, actually, and I'm sort of really pleased to be able to announce the launch of the Basingstoke Early Help Hub, which takes some saying. That comes into play from June the 1st of this year, and it's a multi-agency, so a collection of all partners that will consider the various levels of need. And certainly what we've tried to do with the Children's Trust, which obviously includes all the partners, is redefine what we mean by the levels. And people may have heard tiers before, tier 1, tier 2. Very confusing. So what we've done is gone back out to consultation with all partners, and we've got some parents involved in that as well, and redefined what we mean by level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Level 4 is statutory intervention, children's social care, child protection, safeguarding. That's absolutely tier 4, and that is social care responsibility. Tier 3, which is essentially these sorts of troubled families, require that more targeted approach, and the early help hubs have been set up to deliver that more targeted approach. The tier 2 or level 2 families and the level 1 families, which are the ones that I think you're referring to, will still receive a service from the hub, be signposted and supported through a variety of health visiting, children's social care, children's centres, and all those agencies will come together under this early help hub and a coordinated response, either through direct work or through signposting to other agencies.
Thank you. Actually, I'm thinking of a tier before that. I just wonder if compulsory training in basic parenting for Year 11 students or whatever might actually be so valuable, because a lot of these emerging troubled families, they come out of people who have no role models and have no role model of good parenting, and just some basic training in parenting for all school pupils might just reap some rewards.
Fortunately, the curriculum is sort of outside of my particular knowledge and expertise, but fortunately we've got a colleague behind us, my district manager colleague for education, who might feel that she'd like to comment on that. I don't know, Jean, if I'm putting you on the spot, but...
Why not?
Sorry.
Hello, thank you. Yes, I mean, the curriculum, the national curriculum is determined. Schools have a certain amount of freedom. It would be for the leadership team and the governing body to determine specific elements like that. There is a review of national curriculum currently, which is to give schools greater freedom to select some core elements, but at secondary level, there's a fair amount of the curriculum is determined by the examination structure. So certainly there is a lot of personal, social, emotional development work that goes on that would cover some of the dimensions about parenting, but probably not in as specific a manner as that you're probably suggesting, but might be something that would be debated by governing bodies.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bound.
The question has been answered. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, any comments anybody would like to make? If I just draw everybody's attention back to the recommendation, which is just to note the progress on the implementation of the scheme. Okay, well, take that as noted then, and thank you very much for coming along to speak to us again. Thank you. Okay, before I move on to the next item, although I will in part move on to it, I'm aware that Councillor Mrs Ossleton just wants to provide the committee with a quick update in terms of last time she spoke about the visits that she'd made into some of the schools. She'd just like to give us a quick update on that first.
Thank you, Chairman. The administration in 2013 had concerns regarding the educational outcomes in the borough. And in discussion with officers and some councillors, it was agreed that a two-pronged approach was required. I asked officers if we could be invited or we could find some mechanism so that we could visit, officers and myself could visit 11 secondary schools that we have in the borough, to have a discussion with the teachers, head teachers, regarding education and skills. And you'll hear further from Daniel as to the thoughts of the head teachers. Initially I went out with Natalie Wigman and latterly with Daniel. But from our visits we have seen that the educational outcomes in the borough have changed considerably over the past 6 years. In 2007, many schools at both Key Stage 2 and 4 were underperforming. Developing provision through improving the quality of teaching as well as raising expectation and school expertise has therefore been the focus. And it must be remembered, in order to attain an expected level at age 16, a student requires at least 9 years of effective schooling to ensure that core skills and knowledge are taught and that confidence and application are increased. And this was uppermost in our thoughts as well when we went out to talk to the head teachers. But we should remember that when change is taking place, it takes time, and you'll see what I mean when we actually go through the slides. Many of these schools are now working with new staff and new head teachers. The secondary schools were very responsive, as you can see from my first slide. We visited Aldworth Sciences right down to the Vine Community School over the year. We are to go into Cranbourne at the end of April. The head teacher there has been busy looking after 2 schools, so we've respected her wishes, so she will be added to the school list at the end. We have not been asked into the Clear, into the Hurst or Testbourne. Testbourne's doing very well, and I have an input now into the Clear School because it's in my catchment area and I'm the council representative on there, so I'm sure I will have ample opportunity to talk to head teachers there. From the skills aspect, we wish to ask students if they were helped or how they were helped with their career opportunities and awareness of local jobs. And how could the borough help and promote schools in the preparation for the bigger world? And as you know, we've got exciting times here in Basingstoke. We're developing the top of the town, we're developing Basing View. There's so much going on, and we should take our young people with us in the future and the opportunity for jobs. Basingstoke jobs for Basingstoke students. We've also been to Queen Mary College, and we've interacted with the student union members there on their thoughts, and they've given us quite a lot to think about, I can tell you, on education. We've also got them involved on the buses as well, so we're going to have a lively debate with the youth in the borough. And now that we've got the head teachers on board, and it has taken us some time to go in there, because we're not going in there to criticise, we're going in there to help. And I hope the slides that we're going to show you and update you in the moment will speak for itself. And I hope we will be going back in annually to work with the head teachers to see if what we're planning to do will be of help or has been of help to them, and we can help them further. So we've now got a dialogue going, and as long as I'm the portfolio holder, I hope, and whoever took over from me, will keep this dialogue up, because it is so important for the children of our borough. And if I pass over to Daniel, and he can explain to you then what.
Councillor Bound, you're indicating that you want to jump at this point.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned the Hurst, and it happens to be my ward.
Yes.
Did they know that you would like to have gone in there?
Yes,
I mean,
they do.
right, and there's no indication that they... Right, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sultan. Just kind of quick presentation to update you on what's been happening. I'll start with the challenges, so kind of on the negative side of things, move on to the positive side of things. We met the head teachers. We asked them kind of 3 key questions. The first one is, what are the key challenges? What are the good news stories? And also, how can the local authority maybe support you? In terms of key challenges, the first one is really the perception, and I think it's perception that the local schools is quite negative. People have got this vision that schools in Basingstoke do not perform as well as other areas, which is not partly true. And this impact on recruitment. Some schools reported that they did struggle to recruit teachers, particularly in maths and English. It's not just linked to the perception of the schools, but also to housing provision, cost of living in Basingstoke, and also the fact that we're close enough to London, people to actually go and work in Greater London and actually get the extra allowance on their salary. There's a perceived exodus of students to other areas, and I think perceived is a key word, because when we looked at figures, the retention rate in Basingstoke for year 6 to 7 is 92.48%, and overall, looking from year primary school to year 11, is 95.33%. When we look deeper into kind of where the people move, it's actually in areas where the people that live in these areas, the catchment area actually falls into Winchester and Hart. For example, Robert Mays and Parent School in Alresford, are the 2 schools where most people tend to go, because the Cambervers, for example, fall in their catchment area and stop areas along the Hart boundary. Head teachers all reported that they were a little bit fed up with the local press coverage in terms of schools, a lot of kind of negative stories and not a lot about kind of good things happening in local schools, so something that we need to look at. And also, head teachers said that they didn't work together enough, but this needs to be balanced with the fact that they're actually competing against each other as well to attract their students. So I think it's kind of, they would like to work more together, but on the other hand, they think, well, we need to have more students in our schools. So that's kind of one of the other challenges. In terms of under-subscription, at the moment, not all the schools are full, but there is a booming demand plan predicted for the next 4 years' time, and by then schools will be at full capacity. Also, talking to students and head teachers, we found that there were kind of issues around the level aspirations of our local young people. This can be explained by the fact that, for example, Basingstoke operated recently at full employment, very low unemployment, so it wasn't difficult for a young person leaving school at 16 to actually get a job quite quickly. It's no longer the case, obviously, with the recession, and we find that now graduates, for example, are actually taking jobs, that are kind of way below their qualifications. So we need to do some work on informing young people about what opportunities there are locally. Talking to primary students, for example, we found that they didn't really know, what sectors were in Basingstoke, where the job opportunities were, what employers were looking for in terms of skills. So I think, some work we need to do on this as well. In terms of outlook, so I think it's not all doom and gloom. As I said, Basingstoke performs better than other areas. Looking at our neighbours, for example, Test Valley and Rushmore. As Councillor Sultan mentioned, there are new teachers that have come in at the Vine, Brighton Hill, and also Costello next year. And I think, when the new head teacher comes in, you need to allow for a period of change. So I think, the results might, show in 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line. Speaking to head teachers as well, they said they're all tackling poor performance. For example, the Vine School looked at all their teachers, observed all their teachers, and basically more or less got rid of the ones that were underperforming. So I think, there are good things happening. There's some really good practice in local schools. I'm not going to go through all of them, but for example, Brighton Community College has joined the National Citizenship Programme, so there's actually extra support for their students in year 11 to take part into employability skills, teamwork, that sort of things. Costello has got very strong relationships with AWE, kind of connecting business and education. Bishop Salon are the same. And also, we need to remember we have 2 colleges locally, one with good and outstanding features, and the other one excellent, that's Peacock and Queen Mary's College. So there is actually good provision at local level. In terms of supporting schools, as far as we're concerned, I think I need to point out that Basingstoke is not the education authority, so our scope for direct action in schools is very limited. But what we can do is work with local partners that are engaged with schools at the moment. About 8 months ago, we set up the Basingstoke Employment and Skills Zone. The remit of the zone is goes beyond working with schools, but part of it is actually engaging with schools. We've got an action plan, and we've got some subgroups, and one subgroup is specifically looking at school engagement and raising aspirations.
And also another group is looking at promoting STEM, because STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which is kind of quite a big sector locally. And employers tell us that they start to notice that we are having some skill shortages in that sector. So we need to work with schools to promote those careers in the future. And I think our key partner in terms of working with schools is BasingStoke Consortium. They already do a lot of work with schools. They kind of organize careers fair, progression fairs, and also, and I think we need to kind of work more with them and support them kind of better with working with schools. And one example is, for example, our HR department here internally has actually worked with the consortium, going into schools, delivering some training workshops on customer service and promoting employability skills. The last thing I'll mention is we are currently working on Section 106, developer contribution, and looking at how we can use those to first of all promote apprenticeships and work experience on construction site when a new development comes in, but also try to get some cash contribution from the development to promote local skill and training initiatives, and particularly working with schools. That's the update. And well, we're on the way of doing it. That's it for me. Yep, sorry.
Right, thank you, Daniel. Can I now introduce Jean Thorpe? Jean is coming over, and then we probably could take the questions all together. You're going to update us on the educational attainments from 2013. Yes, did it? Thank you. Thank you. There's some papers coming round just to supplement the papers that you would have had previous discussion. Firstly, thank you for sort of re-inviting me, as it were, to update you again. When we spoke before, the data for Key Stage 4 was unvalidated, so that's the GCSE level data. It is broadly the same. The headline figures look similar or almost the same. It's actually the detail that's underneath that has changed a little bit. And what I've done in just putting together a few pieces for you is to pull on some of the work that Tim did, which was actually very helpful, so thank you, Tim. First of all, just that summary on the first page, the range, I mean, it is absolutely right to reflect the range of performance across the district, and it reflects, first of all, the strength and the health of the schools, but also the socioeconomic profile that is very, very broad, and it's unlikely that will be fully ironed out with the interventions and the support that's going on. I suspect there will always be a range, although that gap, the range between the most high-performing schools and the lowest performing schools is closing. And actually that phrase, closing the gap, is quite a helpful phrase to become familiar with, because it is the way in which we talk a lot of the time about ensuring that our youngsters, building on the conversation that Mike's just had with you, our youngsters who have had a difficult background, difficult start, and those youngsters that haven't had a difficult start. So closing the gap between outcomes for those two groups is a real key for us. For schools above the average, there you can see those the last two bullet points, 3 schools below and the 4 schools below. Those are the schools where I spend most of my time working. As a district manager, I'm coordinating the support, the intervention, the challenging questions, the recruitment, and so on. But also a big part is identifying early as possible the potential decline, and that's generally picked up through the annual visit and the sort of desktop scrutiny of data, the conversations that I'll have with colleague head teachers. So ensuring that I'm out working in schools as much as I can is really, really very important. I'm actually in the clear tomorrow morning, as it happens, so I will say hello. Okay. Next page, you've got just the background data that Tim provided you with, and then the following page I just want to pick up. You've got a graph, a line graph there showing 2 sets of data. First of all, the 5A to C's, top set, 5A to C's, not specifically including English and Maths, and then the 3 lines below including English and Maths. We now rarely use the 5
without English and maths, although schools do like us to look at it because it's generally much higher. So those of you who are governors in schools, and I will know some of you, just enjoy looking at that, but actually it's the English with English and maths data that's particularly important, because that's a key measure, as is the 3 levels of progress data for English and for maths, and I'll share that with you in a moment. The profile is not very different over time. You can see that sort of the bottom line there. England and Hampshire are much, much closer now in 2013, and actually hasn't been until last year. And Hampshire last year did not perform as well as it has done in recent years. Basingstoke similar sort of profile as it has certainly in 11 and 12 against the Hampshire line. Looking at those notable changes, and I can just take you through those bullet points and just give you a little bit of data behind those, because the process that the County Council has, my branch has, which is this annual visit as a minimum, enables us to be quite clear about what the strengths and areas for development are in each of our schools. That's from age 4 through to 16. And keeping that relationship and that conversation going is fairly critical. For Everest last year, that improvement was almost wholly rested in English improvement. In terms of the decrease in the Vine was almost wholly in maths. Costello, almost wholly in English. Bishop Challoner, that improvement was a considerable improvement in maths against the previous year. And for Cranbourne, interesting, there's been a steady increase in all aspects over the last 3-4 years. So it's 2012, there was a little bit of a blip there, but actually if you look at the trend data, so Cranbourne is probably the strongest school in terms of consistency. Final results, I always ensure I'm never away on leave around GCSE result day because it's just too anxious. In fact, I was a couple of years ago on a barge and the internet wasn't that good, but I found it somewhere. Just to pick up on a couple of those points that Councillor Mrs Osselton referred to, leadership team stability, and actually it really is key. Of the 11 schools, 5 of them have had considerable leadership changes that absolutely coincide with fluctuating outcomes. Whether the turbulence in leadership is a consequence of the fluctuating outcome, or whether the fluctuating outcome is a consequence of the leadership changes, it's a little bit of a mixture of both, actually. But if I look at Aldworth, has had new head teacher and leadership team. Their results haven't been, a little bit of fluctuation, but not so strong, so much. Brighton Hill, new head teacher, real changes throughout the school. The Clear, considerable leadership changes. Fort Hill, considerable leadership changes, and as referred to earlier, the head teacher at Cranbourne is currently overseeing Fort Hill's improvements in a sort of executive head teacher role with a little bit of further strengthening beneath her at Fort Hill. And the Vine, we've had considerable changes there as well. So for the 5 of the 11, there has been a lot of change. And it genuinely takes time to build a team back up again, and actually to ensure that everybody's pointing in the right direction, everybody understands the real issues. It isn't straightforward. Just to move on, 3 of those 5 I've just mentioned had a decline in 2013, which for those 3 schools represented effectively equal to or the lowest results in those schools for 3 years, Brighton Hill, Fort Hill and the Vine. But those, all 3 are predicting considerably improved outcomes for this summer. One of the schools is anticipating attainment to take it to above that of the national and local authority averages. And certainly all 3 are predicting and have confidence in their predictions. they're predicting their outcomes to be above that of the contextually applied estimate. So an estimate that would be applied when you take into consideration socioeconomic factors, the free school meal, data, prior attainment of those youngsters. So, as I say, 23rd or so of August is fairly critical for a lot of schools and a lot of us. One of the things that we referred to at the last meeting, and I know that I was asked to speak briefly about, was a comment against the achievement against socio-economic expectations. And I think it is critical to be able to understand that, although the measures that are required centrally and about life chances for young people are about all young people achieving a good standard of progress in English and maths and attainment in five subjects, including English and maths, regardless of socioeconomic profile. But I think it's helpful to understand why some schools may appear to be performing very well, and yet with some scrutiny actually aren't performing as well as they need to. And the sheet I have given you, a graph with colours, mine is black and white at the moment, gives you a little bit of a flavour there. That zero line through the middle is where a school is attaining in line with expectations. And the measure that is used is something that helps us to profile each school. So a school will be profiled using a Fisher Family Trust set of estimates against the free school meal profile of each cohort, the prior attainment of each cohort, whether there are youngsters who are in care, what the special educational needs profile is of the cohort, and additional factors as well. And that enables us to look at how well a school is doing. So, for example, if you take the CLEAR, when factored in all of the advantages that the young people have in last year's year 11, in the 3 levels of progress measure, the maths in English and in maths, and the attainment measure, it actually performed below expectation that you would expect that group of youngsters to attain. As did Brighton Hill, as did the Hurst. You can see with the same measure there, Cranbrook, for example, the youngsters attained more strongly than would have been expected if you compare them with all youngsters with the same socioeconomic profile, and considerably stronger in English progress and in line with expectations in maths. You can't see a maths bar there, that's because it's in line with. Everest, similar profile, although not quite as strong in maths. Bishop Challoner, very strongly in maths, but actually a little below in English progress and in A5, A to C, including English and maths, despite having a very high overall attainment. Just give you a moment or two just for a little look at that. So whilst not losing sight at all of the key measures that are nationally required, so that's typically for youngsters to make 70% of youngsters in a school to make 3 levels of progress between joining the school in year 7, leaving junior school, and leaving in year 11. So 3 levels of progress in English and in maths for a school to have 70% of their youngsters achieving that. And last summer, 35 or 40% this summer of youngsters achieving 5A to C, including English and maths. So that's the standard, the sort of national benchmark. Not losing sight of that, it is helpful actually just to have a profile using socioeconomic measures, because that enables me to challenge schools that might believe that they are performing well because they actually have high numbers. Does that make sense? Just moving on, one of the aspects that is a real priority for us as a local authority and a national priority, but Hampshire as a local authority, because our performance is poor, is around the attainment of our most vulnerable students, and those we would categorise as those students who are in receipt of what is called pupil premium funding. Those are generally, in the main, service families, but mostly it's the youngsters who are in receipt of free school meals or are children looked after, so children in care. And I referred to this terminology of closing the gap, and it's actually closing the gap between those youngsters who are in receipt of pupil premium and those who aren't. And if you just look at the bottom of that table, or almost the bottom, nationally the gap, 5A star to C's, including English and Maths, those not in receipt of free school meals and those who are, it's about 26 or so percent. Hampshire, the gap is wider than that, it's 34%. And there are lots of discussions around why might that be. Is it about the profiling through the county of a relatively small number of free school meal students in some districts, and therefore a smaller number actually means the planning for it hasn't been as robust? Or is it that the county performs quite well, quite high, and therefore a gap is easier to see, to have? Regardless of any of those discussions, those points, the gap is too large, and it is a particular focus of central government on Hampshire as a local authority. Basingstoke and Deane still above national at 30%, below Hampshire. We can actually see the last summer's gap for specific schools there for you. And I have put down the percentage of students in the cohort because I think that's quite helpful as well. But again, some of the particularly high attaining schools maybe don't or have not done as well, or didn't do as well last summer for perhaps some of the most vulnerable youngsters. Something that the local authority did last summer, before this set of data came in actually, was to, recognising that this was a particular focus in an area that we needed to improve, visited every one of the secondary schools and carried out a sort of fairly high level visit to scrutinise what specifically the schools were doing, and that's actually informing some shared practice, some project work that's going on now. Just to turn over, and perhaps also make reference to some of the things that Councillor Osselton referred to. How does the local authority respond to that profile? So specifically, some bespoke work, considerable work actually, has gone on in 4 of those schools: Brighton Hill, Fort Hill, The Vine and Hurst. There is also quite a lot of school commissioned work that my inspectors, advisors for specific subject areas or teaching and learning experts, they've been commissioned by the schools. They're working on most of the schools actually in Basingstoke, with the exception of Everest as it's a sponsored academy. And there is always at least one annual visit. I've had data meetings where I pulled all of the schools together, including Everest actually, to discuss what does the profile, the data look like, what is it saying, where are the strengths, where are the obvious areas for focused work, helping them to understand the borough profile. And whilst I understand that schools talk about the fact that perhaps they don't work as, haven't worked as collaboratively as they might, and also recognising the tension around the competitive nature of school places, I feel as if those head teachers are working more closely now than perhaps they have done for some considerable time. A lot of new head teachers I've been responsible for appointing, working with their governing bodies and appointing them, and therefore muscling in on their induction and putting them, sort of trying to join them up. And I genuinely feel it's tighter now than it has been for some time. planned work, and most of the schools are signed up to it, and it requires them to work not only across each school, but actually between the secondary school and their linked primary feeder. So some improving writing work into Key Stage 3, looking at improving an English curriculum for Basingstoke, where, because there are several schools that are smaller, ensuring that they collaborate more tightly, sharing resources. That's just got underway. The Let's Think programme is a cognitive development programme linked to the University of London, which is actually very challenging, but helping to ensure that our youngsters, as they move through into years 10 and 11, are quite well placed to feel confident in tackling the revised exam syllabus. That's a particularly exciting piece of work. Another piece of work is a transition project between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. Traditionally, there has been some lost ground in Year 7 and in Year 8. They're not examined years. There has been some scepticism on part of the secondary schools in terms of the strength of the primary schools' assessments. It is what it is. Trying to ensure that transition isn't about administrative transition. You know, here's the library, here are the loos, here's the sports hall. Much more around transition in learning. What is it that the young people in Year 6 can already do that secondaries need to be more smart at building on? And the secondaries really strongly recognise that, actually. And then there's some specific project work on this free school meal gap work that's going on. And again, I was working on that today with some schools and hoping to take that through into the summer term as well. So that gives you a sense of a little bit more of what's underneath the data. As I've already said, Summer Outcomes 2014, it's watch this space, and I'm very happy to come back and talk more to you in the autumn term. Thank you.
Thank you for that again. Are there any questions that the committee would like to ask? Councillor Tomlin?
Thank you, Chair. It's a question on your graphs on, there is no page number, this one, well, here. It's sort of an interest question, and it's probably, I probably know the answer, but if you had the data and if the exam systems were consistent going back in time, what would the shape of that graph be, would you say? Is it, sorry, it's a bit of a difficult, I want to know whether we've gone over a cliff or whether we've plateaued and we're increasing, or what's the sort of feel where we are now?
I feel as if we've got an improving profile. I absolutely do. The last 2 years it has been some real tension around early entry English. You've heard all of these discussions and the way in which some schools decided to play it, and not particularly Basingstoke and Dean, but there's been some real tension around that. I think that we're going to have a couple more years where it is going to be fairly turbulent because the changes to the GCSE system, so removing some of the equivalences, and some of the Basingstoke schools have already removed those and therefore don't feel, they would say, if you were to ask them, that they don't feel they've been competing on an even playing field to some other schools in other areas. There's that, the equivalences, and also the change, the shift in the first GCSE that is entered counts, so you can't retake that. So part of the project work around Let's Think and the Basingstoke, the curriculum in English is typically attention. Part of that is about trying to actually remove the vagaries of an examination system from the way in which the school plans its curriculum. It's actually about developing robust English teaching from Year 7 to enable youngsters as they move sort of Year 10 and Year 11 to feel strong and confident enough about English to cope with whatever is thrown at them, whatever the flavour is that year.
Councillor Mrs Reid?
Thank you, Chair. My question actually is not dissimilar to Councillor Tomlin's, but it's about the graph comparison against contextual expectations. So if I'm reading this correctly, the only school at the moment which is performing in line or above expectations on your 3 markers there is Cranbourne. That's correct.
Absolutely correct, yes.
Thank you. Which is a little bit worrying, I suppose. But in which case, do you have this information for previous years? And can you perhaps suggest to us whether this is an improving picture or whether using that data it's in line with previous years or getting worse?
I didn't do it last for 2012, I did it for 2011, and there are as many below as there are above, but it's all shifted around again. It is very interesting, and I use it because I'm challenging schools who, for want of a better expression, I feel have coasted on high numbers, all right? You have to look at that with the table below, which is effectively what the government will, the sort of what they want, which is 70% 3 levels of progress in English and in maths, and strong combined attainment. So I use it for that. I suspect what I would need to do is probably do a 3-year trend and then get a sense of what each year looked like against the 3-year trend. Something I'm not doing at the moment, or two.
Are there any other questions? I haven't had any hands up. Okay, again, this is just a report to note. So, do the committee have any comments to make, or Councillor Harvey?
I'll add some comments if that's all right, Chair. Can I thank the Cabinet Member for the report to start with, and then the 2 presenters. One thing I wanted to contribute to this debate, it was a shame I couldn't be at the last meeting because I understood it was an important debate. You had a good conversation about it when the paper came before. Just a couple of points to pick up on. I think it's not just the loss of senior leadership. I think we can't underestimate the loss in English, maths and science and the turnover. Because we've got 8 schools in the town area, let alone the 11 across the whole area, trying to find 8 top heads of maths and 8 top heads of English is a consistent issue. So I respect what's been said about the senior leadership team, but I wouldn't want us to lose sight of the difficulty that schools are facing recruiting heads of department to be quality leaders and middle management leaders in those areas. I think that's important, and maybe that relates to what was being said in terms of our assistance as a borough and what we can offer as recruitment and retention. I mean, going back all those years to the key worker and all those ideas that were floating around, if we want to attract these people to Basingstoke, what are we offering, and what could we offer that would be an aspirational enticement to come to Basingstoke to be part of our schools? The other issue just to pick up on, and again, I've been still in the middle of Woke Street today getting signatures on a petition on apprenticeships. And one of the issues that's come up consistently from the young people I've been speaking to today was loss of connections, and the impact that the loss of connections had on the career services, and how long it's taken for the schools to adjust their own careers. And the CDCs have been superb, and I'm sure the Cabinet Member and the Council Leader can attest to this themselves, that the CDCs have picked up the baton on this one, but that gap has created an issue with the employment aspects that were being talked about. And again, is that somewhere that we can help? Is that something that we can do as an authority to pick up that baton to assist with? The other issue I wanted to raise was the collegiate approach. I appreciate what Gina said in relation to a number of the head teachers coming in new now, and that turnover has perhaps helped us deal with some of the issues of personality before. There's always an issue when you've got a head teacher talking to another head teacher, how's your school doing? And what are you doing that I'm not doing? And how are you on my patch nicking my kids from my feeder schools, and so on? The relationship there is really important. But one of the things that wasn't mentioned, and it is an issue, is the DFE bruises that are kicking around, with the head teachers having to look over their shoulder. And if I don't do this and I don't get this, the DFE are coming on me. And it's this thing it's not the LEA, it's these individuals who are operating with the DFE mandate outside of the LEA that then cause our head teachers and cause our schools problems. And I personally have an issue with that. When a DFE bruiser walks into a school and says, if you don't get the results this year, you're next in line, I find that disgraceful and disgusting, because it is not a collegiate approach. It doesn't help our local schools at all, and it doesn't help our LEA. It's a political point, but it is a serious one, because it is having an impact. And the other point I wanted to pick up was the issue of our size schools, Chair, and we mustn't lose sight of that. We've got 8 small size schools in a town the size of Basingstoke. You know, you go to anywhere else in the country, you may have 4 schools that are much larger, much more powerful institutions in their own right to bring in all these elements and to deal with all these elements. But we've got so the cohort that goes through each year, because of the size of it, has such a dramatic impact. And I've seen this at the Vine. You know, that size of a small cohort can have such a dramatic impact in 1 year's set of results. It's huge. So again, it's just bits that haven't fallen out of the report, haven't necessarily fallen out of what's been said so far. But I'd hate for the committee and hate for the council not to take on board, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other? Councillor Mrs Tucker.
Thank you. It's not a question, but it's just something that happened to me recently. I was at the AWE and there were 3 young lasses introduced to us all, and equally one actually had come back. She didn't go straight from school, but they'd started an apprenticeship. They had never thought that any kind of engineering, whether it be electrical or whatever, could be for them. They just had no idea, but they've got in it and they are absolutely enthralled in the work that they're doing. And as a result, they're now going out to schools to teach the children, other children, you know, we are female, we are doing it, and it's great. And they're probably one in a sort of cohort of chaps, and they're surviving. Bless them. They were lovely. It actually made me feel so elated to feel that these youngsters are there, and they're also trying to share it with other people. I just wanted to say this because it had made such an impression on me. It was wonderful.
Thank you for sharing that. Councillor Mrs Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, just wanted to pick up on something that Councillor Harvey said about the loss of connections and the impact that has on young people, especially when they're coming towards the end of school and looking for work. But I think we need to be mindful of the very good work that's going on that within the LCPs and the new projects that are coming forward through that, through direct funding for that, which are in some ways picking up that slack and making sure that there is something there for young people. And there's a lot of work going on in that, and within the individual schools as well. For example, Biking Community School, I know there's some really good work going on in there, again, to make up that gap which was there with the loss of connection. So it's not a completely bleak picture. I think there is some very good stuff going on, and there is support there for young people if they want to move forward and get this sort of careers advice.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. So, what's our strategy for tackling the press and the negativity of Basingstoke, and everybody goes to Winchester or Alton and places like that? I have to say I've experienced this quite a lot. My wife was at QMC for 25 years, and part of her role was to actually go out and sell the college as well. And there's just this thing about Basingstoke. Now, is it that we might be able to offer marketing advice and, I don't know, funding, because you can't just magic wand money out of thin air, but something that encourages our schools to perhaps be present at some of the, well, they're not careers fairs, but they're school fairs for bringing people up and help them in some way, because, I mean, there's obviously cash-strapped schools in many respects, and maybe something like that to actually enable them to actually put Basingstoke a little bit firmer on the map, or help them with the marketing. I don't know, but have we got thoughts on that matter? Thanks.
Ms Sustin.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Talking to the head teachers, etc., we thought it would be very nice if they did their good news stories. A lot of schools are doing a lot of projects, working with a lot of people in the community, and it's not reported on. So it's basically trying to get the Gazette on our side as well, and to congratulate the schools on what they're actually doing, because they're doing an awful lot of good work, and the children are brilliant at going out and talking to people, etc. And this is part of them growing up and being introduced to the wider community. But we don't see that sort of thing. Nothing's ever said. So that's one of the things that we are looking at, that we want better communication between our press, etc., and the schools. I think it's very important. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
just very quickly on that point, maybe we can look to our own magazine and our own publications to help in that respect with some of the good news stories, because that goes to everybody's door. It's good, but the other point as well is most schools haven't got the time to do with marketing. It's the difficult thing of when the reporter picks up the phone and says, I hear X, Y and Z, and that's a reaction rather than actually having the time to do something positive with marketing. And it is difficult because they don't necessarily have the skilled staff in the school to do the marketing side of it.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Councillor Tomlin, for actually raising that. I think that was quite an important point to raise, and as Councillor Osterton says, the schools are doing a lot of good work, and I say only recently, but only out of school 9 years ago, which it really isn't that long, but again, schools do a lot of good work, and it would be good if they got some good publicity rather than negative all the time. Can I take that then that this report is noted by the committee, and thank you once again for coming along and speaking to us. It really is very informative. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to go now. Yes. Okay. If I move on to item 14 now and pass over to the leader of the council to introduce the paper.
Thank you very much, and good evening, members. Good evening, members. It's obviously been a long day. I think it was probably 2 years ago, coming up now, when I remember coming to this same committee and talking about the possibility of working more closely with the community safety teams in Hart and in Rushmore, and the opportunities that existed for merging together officer teams and then subsequently to merge the community safety partnerships to give a more overarching framework for all the activity that goes on under the community safety umbrella by each one of the councils, but also each one of the partner organisations that are involved within the community safety community. We are now, as I say, 2 years on. The community safety teams have been merged, and therefore it's appropriate, and that's a year and a bit of experience of that merger now. So it's appropriate to come back to you and to review what has happened during that time, and where things have gone well and where things have gone less well. As inevitably there are always some things that you would want to do better, and that's part of the point of a review, to identify those points. And then secondly, to look at the next stage, which is the proposed merger of the CSPs, which it is planned should take place during the course of this year if all partners within that agree. So what we have for you tonight is very little of me and an awful lot more of Caroline Ryan, who is sitting next to me, who leads the community safety team in North Hampshire. And I'm going to ask her to run through the activities and the successes of the team. And then we can open the discussion up and cover any aspects of it that you wish to do at that stage. So over to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Councillor, and good evening, everybody. My name is Caroline Ryan. I'm the Community Safety Manager for Safer North Hampshire, covering Hart, Rushmore, Basingstoke and Deane. And I'm really relieved that I found my presentation. I thought it would be useful to recap on the reasons for the collaborative working arrangement. We were experiencing a loss of financial support from government grants and partner contributions, a significant loss of money. The BCU grant was taken the year before we merged, and approximately £30,000 a year went there. We'd certainly seen a reduction of almost 3/4 in the government grants that were coming through to community safety. There's a very complex structure of community safety partnerships across Hampshire, and we knew that the PCC was about to arrive, the Police and Crime Commissioner was about to arrive and about to be given the pot of money. And we felt that we'd have a much better chance of accessing some of that funding if we were to work collaboratively and reduce the number of CSPs that he had to engage with. Partner agencies, we work with a lot of partner agencies whose boundaries are not coterminous with ours, and so they might cover 2 areas and be attending duplicate meetings across 2 areas. And so it was felt that by combining, we could reduce some of that burden on those partner agencies. At the time, when we were going through the review process, the police had recently changed their structure and had gone to a structure where they were working northern, southern and central Hampshire. And so we felt that there was some ground to be made in working in a more effective way in the northern area with them. And of course the common priorities. The 3 areas are very different. But interestingly, the strategic assessments every year dictate that there are the same priorities. It's just the scale that is different across the areas. It's a bit difficult for you to see, unfortunately, but this is the makeup of the team. It's swollen a little since we first began. I have secured funding for an apprentice, interestingly. I did have an apprentice in position who managed to get herself a full-time job and has now moved on, but that funding is still in place, and we've supported her into her new role, so she's now undertaking that apprentice training in her full-time job. I've also been able to recruit an admin officer through funding that we were able to get from the PCC, and the domestic violence coordinator for North East Hampshire has been brought into the team, which makes absolute sense because her work is so intrinsic to the stuff that we're doing in community safety. In addition to the staff that report directly to me, I've developed working procedures that enable us to task directly the accredited community support officers and the CSPOs in Basingstoke. So one of the reasons that we came together was that there were financial savings to be made, and certainly those financial savings were realised to the tune of £107,000 across the 3 areas. For Basingstoke, that equated to £41,000. The savings in the first instance were largely due to staff savings because of sharing certain posts in the team. The crime analyst is a shared post, a third. I'm a shared post, a third. There's an element of the antisocial behaviour team leader's role, which is shared across the 3 areas, whilst he's out doing his team leading for the antisocial behaviour officers in the other outlying areas. And so that's how we realised the savings in the first year. One of the other things that I mentioned earlier is that we felt that we'd be able to access funding from the PCC in a more meaningful way if we were working collaboratively. We did put a bid in with the other CSPs across Hampshire for work relating to antisocial behaviour and the nighttime economy. This bid urged the PCC actually to recognise that there is no one-size-fits-all. It would be very difficult to commission a service across the whole of Hampshire that actually addressed the needs in the areas that we're dealing with because of their difference. And so we managed to secure £20,000 across Safer North Hampshire for that work specifically. We made 3 further bids to the PCC at that time. There was an incredibly tight turnaround to get the bids in, and we managed to get £19,500 out of that bid process. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the bids that we put in and what we've managed to do with that money to date and how that's benefited Basingstoke. Challenge and Change programme is a programme that's it's a very robust programme. It specifically targets people who are causing a disproportionate amount of antisocial behaviour. And we've found an incredible amount of enthusiasm from both the PCC, who is focused on antisocial behaviour, putting victims at the heart of everything he does, and reducing the number of reoffenders and first-time entrants to the criminal justice system. And also the partners that we're working with, and the support has been absolutely great. Key partner agencies who've signed up to assist in the delivery of these sessions include the police, the fire service, magistrates, victim support, and Winchester Prison. The aim of the programme is exactly what it says, is to challenge people's behaviour. So we start off by talking to them about the consequences should they continue down the path they're going down. We then take them to a custody unit at a police station, and they're walked through what would happen to them if they were arrested, the cell that they would be put in, their DNA and fingerprints are taken, and we then introduce them to a magistrate who will say, if you come before me at the bench, these are the disposals that I have. And the last time we ran the course, we actually gave the youngsters a crime that's commensurate with where they were heading, and asked them to go to the magistrate and say, okay, I'm coming before you with this crime, what are you going to do with me? In the third week of the course, they go to Winchester Prison, and they meet offenders, and they go through security, drug dogs. They go, they're stripped of all their personal belongings. They go in and they are confronted with 6 offenders who will talk to them about the path of offending and the path to custody and custodial sentences. And without exception, they all start in the same place: low-level antisocial behaviour, low-level crime, drug and alcohol misuse, without exception. And the youngsters are invited to ask them about their crimes, invited to say, what do you think I'm in here for then? And they're talking to double murderers, kidnappers. It's incredibly impactful. We take them into the cells and we show them where they would be staying in a 7x7 Victorian cell with 2 cot beds and a toilet. It's not salubrious by any means. In the second part of that day, they get the opportunity to meet the family of a couple of the offenders, and we do the ripple effect and how your crime in the middle affects so many people as you're moving out. What we found with this course is that you'll take youngsters in who are full of swagger, and you'll take little boys home. It's that impactful. You see them change halfway through. The course is ASDAN accredited, so whilst they're doing the course, they get an opportunity to work towards a qualification. They meet victim support. They have a week where they are working with the fire service about some of their decision making. And then at the end of this, because obviously we don't want just to drop them at the end of it, it's about a process of change, and we didn't need to manage that change beyond the programme. We do a warm handover into appropriate programmes like the Young Firefighters Association, Princess Trust, National Trust. If we feel that they need additional support, they can go into a mentoring programme that we've established. Along the way, we've also identified some safeguarding needs and some other pathways that we need to be signposting for youngsters that may have been the victims of things like domestic abuse. We've finished the second course and we have an 80% success rate based on the first 2 cohorts. We're about to start the third course in Basingstoke. It's run out of the fire station, and we're now going to significantly increase the number of youngsters coming through the programme because we've established the programme, made all the necessary changes. We've had interest expressed in this programme from places like Borden and Whitehill, asking whether they can refer their youngsters into the programme. So we're working at the moment with the accreditation to see whether there's a way that we can support other people to set a similar kind of programme up and actually take some something back to support this programme in terms of its sustainability. We also had some money sent through for rural crime, serious acquisitive crime. It's been an issue. It is another thing that is high on the PCC's agenda, but certainly the whole of North Hampshire and wider have been hit by serious acquisitive crime this year. There were blue boxes developed by the crime prevention officers within the police, and those blue boxes contained a range of locks, infrared sensor locks, gas tank locks, and a full list of security items that could be purchased at a cost price. And as part of this programme, the blue boxes were given over to Safer North Hampshire. We ran a series of road shows. We went out to high footfall areas in rural places. We handed out leaflets. We spoke to in excess of 600 people and handed out 500 individual pieces of crime prevention and target hardening. And we will now continue to run the roadshow events on an ad hoc basis where we identify need. We made a bid to the LIBOR fund. We've made a few bids to the LIBOR fund and they've never been successful. So we decided that we'd go bold with this bid, and we were successful to the tune of £59,380 to run a project over a 2-year period to develop a toolkit for victims of domestic violence in service settings. The toolkit will be hosted by the MOD and will be used as a national toolkit. We have now managed to, in my naivety I guess, I suggested early on in this process that maybe we should approach our colleagues within the services to ask whether they might have somebody who'd be interested in a secondment, because it was really important we had somebody who understood the services and the ranking structure in order to access all the policy and all the information that they needed. I thought that they might say, yeah, we need to think about this, but actually we were inundated by people who were interested in coming to do this. So we had to change our thinking somewhat and very rapidly come up with a plan, and we went through a formal process, and we have now recruited a lady by the name of Bex, who's a former major within the army up in Aldershot, and she's absolutely raring to go. So we've got our first scoping meetings coming up to identify exactly what it is that we want the outcome to be, and what research we're going to use to get us to that point, and what groups we're going to use. And obviously that's going to affect Basingstoke in terms of Bramley and Tadley and the armed services presence that you have in the area. So the Drug and Alcohol Action Group has been awarded £10,000 from the Drug and Alcohol Action team. We've developed a virtual forum for professionals, which is hosted on the Safer North Hampshire website and is due to be launched very soon. The platform includes alerts, drug alerts, information sharing blog, timetable of notable events and dates, and a resources library that our professionals will be able to access when they're running campaigns around alcohol and drugs. So we successfully managed to bid for £108,880. And this means that Basingstoke and Deane has benefited by approximately £36,500. And just to put that in context for you, the last year that Basingstoke was operating as this local authority's CSP, they managed to get £19,500 into the council. So we have managed to significantly increase the amount of money that they've received. And obviously this is in addition to the £41,000 savings that were made. So notable changes. The strategic assessment is a statutory obligation for community safety partnerships, and it looks at a year's worth of police data, partner data, both qualitative and quantitative, to identify priorities and to help to direct and target resources over the coming year. It's always been a retrospective document. That's how the guidelines were set when it was first introduced. And so for this current year, we would be working on data that finished April 13. It's caused us some problems because crime trends change so rapidly, and we might find ourselves working on data that isn't comparable to where we are today. And serious acquisitive crime is a good example of that. We know that serious acquisitive crime has been an issue in this area, but we would have been working on data that suggested it wasn't. So I've made a decision in Safer North Hampshire to do an in-year strategic assessment, which means that we're now gathering data on a month-by-month basis, and the draft document is due to be ready mid to late April. And it means that we will be working on a real-time assessment and on real-time priorities. So the other thing that it means for us is that in future, should councillors need information, we will actually have month-by-month information available to us. And when we come to do our 6-month refresh of the strategic assessment document, there won't be as much work required because we'll already have that data to hand. So it's actually streamlined the process for us quite nicely. Developed a victim needs process for our vulnerable and repeat victims of antisocial behaviour. I've been advised by the PCC's office that we'll be receiving somewhere between £15,000 and £20,000 to help with this process, and I'm expecting that to come in any day. All victims of antisocial behaviour who are identified to be vulnerable or repeat callers will be subject to what's called an ASB4, which is a basic risk assessment that's undertaken by the police to determine the level of intervention required by the services involved. Vulnerable victims are currently discussed at the antisocial behaviour panels, which are held monthly, so that if necessary an action plan can be developed to manage the risk. A needs assessment questionnaire has now been developed by the team, and very shortly we will be contacting all high-risk antisocial behaviour vulnerable victims, and we'll be conducting that needs assessment with them at a very early stage. This is so that we can provide a single point of contact if they need to get in touch with us, and that we can make any necessary referrals to other services that may be able to help. And this is a vital piece of work for us, because obviously we don't want to see a repeat of the Pilkington tragedy in this area, and often things can escalate very rapidly, and so managing that risk is a way of avoiding something awful happening. Community coordinating and tasking group. We already issue an e-newsletter on a monthly basis that goes out to members. The intention is that we will have the data tables from the analysis document for the community tasking coordinating group as an appendix to the e-newsletters coming out just to members across the 3 areas, so that you can see at a glance whether any of your areas have any cause for concern in terms of all the crime types and antisocial behaviour. It should be happening as of next week. Okay. And the antisocial behaviour tools and powers, they've had royal assent. We're expecting them to come into play in autumn. It's a significant change from where we've been in terms of antisocial behaviour orders, antisocial behaviour injunctions, Section 30 dispersals and house closures. We're now going to see community protection notices, which will be a formal stop and desist notice, which will cover things like noise, untidy gardens, vehicle nuisance. They are enforceable via a fixed penalty notice or court for non-compliance. And it is not, this power is not meant to replace any statutory nuisance regime that is already undertaken, but it's a very quick fix. The injunction to prevent nuisance and annoyance, this prohibits behaviours and movements such as bans from attending A&E without legitimate reason. The biggest change in the introduction of this is positive behaviours can now be added. Antisocial behaviour orders were imposed by negative behaviours. So you could tell people not to do things, but you couldn't make them do things. So, for instance, if somebody's involved in alcohol, a positive element of that order will now say that you have to attend an alcohol programme, awareness programme or an alcohol treatment programme. So that's a real shift for us. Community behavioural orders, replacing the ASBO by post-conviction. So whereas the councils used to be able to take a standalone ASBO out on somebody, it will now be only available to the most serious antisocial behaviour individuals and can only be obtained by a prosecutor. They can be requested by local authorities through the CPS, but we can no longer go to court and request one. So that's a fair shift for us. Public space protection orders, they're intended to deal with geographical locations where problems are likely to affect the community and can cover anywhere that the public have access to, so local parks where groups of youths might be gathering and swearing. A local authority can impose a public space protection order that bans drinking and imposes a closure time on the park area to try and deal with those issues. Only the local authority can issue this order, but we do have to consult with the Chief Officer of Police and the PCC and any appropriate representatives from the community. If there's a breach of a public space protection order, it can either be dealt with through a fixed penalty notice or prosecution. Closure notices, premises associated with nuisance or disorder. This consolidates a number of powers that are currently in existence relating to licensed and unlicensed premises. It's available to the police and local authorities, and the test of this power is that we have to reasonably believe that there is or is likely to be nuisance and or disorder related to the premises. We can force a 24-hour shutdown. Beyond 24 hours, it has to be signed by a superintendent or chief exec. You can extend to 48 hours, but beyond that you have to go to court. And the court can impose for a closure order of 3 months, and an extension can be requested for 6 months. A breach of this is criminal and could result in a fine or a custodial sentence. Dispersal powers will give the police power to disperse groups of individuals causing or likely to cause antisocial behaviour in a public place. These powers can be used in a public place and in common areas of private land where landowners or occupiers consent, such as shopping centres, where you might have issues with street drinkers. The new power will be offered to the rank of inspector and will not require consultation with the local authority. The community trigger. I don't know if you can see that chart. The community trigger. Victims will be able to use the community trigger to demand action, starting with a review of their case. Agencies including councils, the police, local authority teams and registered providers of social housing will have a duty to undertake a case review when somebody requests one, and should the case meet locally defined thresholds. The CSPs across the county have asked the PCC to consider this threshold with a view to a consistent approach across Hampshire. The community trigger can also be used by any person on behalf of a victim, for example, a family member or a friend, carer, counsellor, MP or other professional person. This is intended to ensure that all victims are able to use the community trigger. However, the victim's consent should be sought by the person using it. The community trigger can be used by someone of any age, and agencies should make it accessible as accessible as possible to all victims. It will help to reassure victims and agencies that their reports of antisocial behaviour are taken seriously, but it cannot in itself increase reporting from vulnerable victims. Agencies should consider how to maximise awareness about the community trigger, in particular among vulnerable people and professionals who work with them. There's also something called the community remedy. And the community remedy will include a range of sanctions against antisocial behaviour and low-level crime. These sanctions will be drawn up in consultation with local community and agreed between the police, the crime commissioner and the chief constable. We will use the community remedies for low-level crimes and antisocial behaviours that were dealt with out of court, either as part of an informal community resolution or a more formal conditional caution. It will mean that victims get justice quickly and the offender has to face the consequences of their actions. So moving on. Notable successes. The team continue to meet with neighbourhood watches across all three areas to keep the momentum going. And we've just managed to procure items to spend their £5,000 that they successfully got from the PCC, and we've helped them to write a new starter handbook, which is currently in print. The secondary education programme that we run is primarily centred around drugs and alcohol, but also covers antisocial behaviour, self-harm, rape, domestic violence, legal high, courts and more. The programme includes off-curriculum days, PSHE classes, or PDL as they're known, assemblies, one-to-one and family therapy, drop-in sessions, peripatetic teacher training and parent education. We're currently working in 3 schools in Basingstoke, Brighton Hill, Cranbourne and Hurst Community College. And we've just completed our second Graffiti Focus Week, which is a joint venture across the other 2 parts of the authority. And I mention that because it shows that we don't have to always work as one area. If there's a particular issue that's affecting 2, we can hive off and work in that way as well. Okay, so we have a direct effect on antisocial behaviour. And as you can see from this graph, Basingstoke is experiencing a steep decline in antisocial behaviour, which is fantastic news, and long may it continue. We've found that they've narrowed the gap between the other 2 authorities to the point where they're catching Rushmore in terms of the levels of antisocial behaviour, and that's since we've come together as one unit. And I think actually one of the main reasons for that is that we now have a very consistent approach to how we have a consistent approach. We have processes and procedures in place that mean that we tackle antisocial behaviour the same as a consistent way across the 3 areas, and that's had a massive effect. And I've put this these figures up here because I wanted you to see this is how Safer North Hampshire is performing, and I wanted you to see how Basingstoke figures in that. So antisocial behaviour across Safer North Hampshire is down by 16%. In Basingstoke it's down 13%. All crime is down by 3% in Safer North Hampshire, and it's down 2% in Basingstoke. And other burglary, which is our serious acquisitive non-dwelling burglary, is actually up by 9% across Safer North Hampshire. It's sheds, garages, outbuildings, farm buildings. So it covers a multitude. But actually, the work that's been carried out in partnership through the Serious Acquisitive Crime Silver Group, which is a multi-agency group, the squad that was established by the police to tackle this, the robust way that the police have dealt with this, means that although it's up by 9% across Safer North Hampshire, it's actually down by 8% in Basingstoke. And this is in-year data, so this is up to the end of March. So the combination agreement has been written in line with statute, and it's not a debate for me to have. It's a debate that's well above my station. But the benefits of the merger will need to be demonstrated in terms of financial benefits, staffing benefits and performance benefits, with particular reference to the key areas that the PCC is concerned with. And I believe that we do have the data in place to demonstrate that we have made a difference since we've come together collaboratively. The vision is for a formally merged partnership, and as Councillor Sanders said, that's what we're looking to do now. It's always been believed that combining the 3 teams would enable greater access to funding, and we've shown that. We knew that there was some excellent practice in the 3 authorities involved, and by coming together, we've been able to identify that practice from all 3 and combine it into one, whilst benchmarking against other areas. A current programme of antisocial behaviour officer relocation, which has just been completed, means that all of the antisocial behaviour officers have worked in all of the districts. They have an understanding of the demography, of the differences in crime, of the partners that they're working alongside, and they've also been able to make sure that the processes and procedures we've put in place are being adhered to as they've moved around, and they found that incredibly useful. staff, as I say, really embraced this, and they started to identify further benefits and changes that could be put in place. We're already reaping some of the benefits in terms of staff resilience. So when we have issues such as recently when Buckskin was suffering from flooding, and the staff in the community safety team did a massive amount of work trying to help that process, the work that they would have been doing in the office was picked up by other members of the team. So we're already starting to see those benefits. Okay, there are some challenges ahead. The loss of the AXO service, the review of the CSPO service here, they provide us with a massive amount of intelligence. We operate a warning system, and that's they've been instrumental in getting that warning system working the way that it is at the moment because of the yellow cards they issue to youngsters when they're out and about. And so we now need to find a way that we can adapt our service to try and compensate for those changes. Changes to the policing structure and the way the policing family is going to be set up. I think there's lots of positives to be gained from that, but certainly there are some unknowns as well. The community rehabilitation programme, which is a massive change to the probation service and the way that it's run. Only very high and very high risk offenders will be now managed by probation, and the rest of the service is actually going out to tender and will be managed by an external company who are currently putting their bids together. And we don't know the effect that that's going to have on the integrated offender management programme and the other ways that we work with them, community payback schemes, those kind of things. The tools and powers that I've mentioned, and obviously the troubled families agenda. I understand that additional funding has been found for troubled families, but there's new criteria for the families coming on board, and I think that's going to be quite challenging, getting all of that data together. In the meantime, we will continue to provide a very robust response to antisocial behaviour, tackle hotspot issues in a dynamic way, find innovative and creative solutions, identify and implement best practice, secure funding, and further develop the projects and programmes that are currently in North Hampshire. Questions? Yes.
Good. So that's the presentation. I think just to be very clear, we mentioned right at the end the question of CSPOs. That is outside the remit of this particular paper. Clearly, we have to think how we're going to react to the loss of the centrally provided service by Hampshire, but I think I've also made it as clear as I possibly could in every conceivable place that we are not going to allow that to affect the safety of the people of the borough, and we will do whatever is necessary. And the review of that is already started. We're already having some very interesting discussions with the police about how we might work much more closely together. We have to have other discussions with other partners involved in that. I think in rather the same way some quite interesting creative ways came out the last time we looked at it. I'm hopeful that the same thing will happen again this time, but that will come back later on during the course of the year, so that's not something that is part and parcel of this particular set of proposals and where we are today. I don't think there's much more to be said. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Mrs Tucker.
Thank you. Could I refer to the tools and powers bit? The two things that intrigued me. When you mentioned untidy gardens, I know a particular, somebody else does as well, particular one where we have a problem, and if we can get some powers to do something about it, it would be wonderful. So could you just explain that one for my first question?
The intention of the tools and powers was to absolutely simplify the process that we have to go through in order to address the issues that exist in our communities. And so what they've said, and there are guidance notes currently out, that we will be able to access, because it will be a local authority power, will be able to access that power to deal with persistent problems where there is persistent noise or vehicle nuisance or untidy gardens, those kinds of things. And it will just be by referral. The full scope of the power, it has not yet sort of come into view, if you like, but we've been checking all the notes. We've been liaising with the Home Office, and we've had a couple of presentations from a Home Office guy that was instrumental in making these changes. And what they really want is for it to be a very pragmatic approach that is simple and sensible for people to be able to address the issues that are affecting the communities.
The second part of that question was, when does that come into force, do we hope?
It has now had royal assent. We're expecting it to be in force in autumn. So early autumn, I'm hoping. Yes.
I shall look forward to that. And the other thing that, with antisocial behaviour, it's rather a slightly general thing, but it always worries me that a number of people who behave badly do have possibly mild, not necessarily bad, mental problems as well. And how is that dealt with?
We're seeing an increased number of referrals for antisocial behaviour where there's mental health issues. And we're working as closely as we can with the mental health service providers to get those people into some kind of therapy that will help them to address the issues that they have. We recognise that is an issue, and unfortunately often what we find is that people that are referred to us for antisocial behaviour are referred to us because there's simply nowhere else for them to go, and they might not meet the threshold for mental health services. It's something that we've escalated centrally. It's something that we talk about a lot locally with relevant partners. We now have a Senko rep that sits on our group, so we have MEND that come in, the mental health come in and actually sit on our antisocial behaviour panels, so that we can discuss those issues.
Thank you, that's reassuring.
Councillor Harpy.
Thank you, Chair. As my colleague just pointed out, just for the record, my grass is arranged vertically rather than horizontally, so it's... In terms of the definition of that, I mean, what is an untidy garden? It's just the difficulty with this is what is going to be definable and what's going to stand up when you do scrutinise it. So I appreciate the point you're making. Can I just say thank you for the presentation, and I really do commend you on all the work you were doing. It is a superb report and a superb level of projects that I think nobody around the table would disagree with and we wholeheartedly support. Just got a couple of questions to really just understand it a little better. On the services point, one of the things that has come up and I think is interesting, I know you were talking about DV in relation to service, but ex-service and the issues associated with transition and reintegration into the community is an issue. Does that feature in that work, or is that something separate?
It does feature very strongly in that work, as do reservists who otherwise fall through the net. The intention is that they will all be consulted with. We're consulting with mental health services around ex-servicemen and women who have gone into mental health services as well. So we have a representative from that element on the board as well. So we've had a covenant meeting. We have the Navy come up from Portsmouth, we have the RAF from Odeon, we have the armed services, and we do have representatives now from the reservists as well. So that's a real move forward.
It's brilliant. I mean, in terms of the covenant, I think that's a massive part of it, really, the post-care in that context. My second question relates to ASB, really. You talked about the risk assessments and all the triggering mechanisms and the way you described it. For me, at least in terms of casework at the moment, there's the two sides of it. There's the low-level ASB, which really isn't going to trigger anything other than a minor police response or a minor response from other authorities. But cumulatively, in the context of a local neighbourhood or a street or a group of houses, is something that is a massive issue. Now, I can understand in terms of the powers you've got, but to achieve that trigger, For example, how many times do you ring 101 so you hotspot it, so then it becomes an issue because it crosses the desk and so on. It's just dealing with the low-level stuff. And then the flip side to that is the number of cases that are emerging of acute ASB that are affecting not a group of the street, but just literally a person and a neighbour. And how we deal with that, because it isn't going to be triggered, because it isn't going to be a hotspot, other than that person again ringing 101 100 times to say the issues that are happening. So I'm just trying to deal with it that end, and then the low-level end, and where that fits with what you were saying.
Often the lower end stuff will actually elicit a number of calls from a number of different people. They're more geographically based issues, and they're dealt with as such. So we might take that to the community tasking coordinating group, and we'll say we've got a particular problem in this street, and there will be a discussion about how we're going to deal with that problem. We use things like neighbourhood agreements, where we'll go out and consult with neighbours about what would make their life easier and how we can come to a compromise agreement that all those neighbours will sign up to about how they'll behave. And actually we've used them 3 or 4 times now to great effect. The other end that you're talking about, where you have an individual who is being targeted or affected by antisocial behaviour, that's why the ASB4 exists, so that a police officer, when they attend, can actually risk assess the vulnerability so that we know what we're dealing with when we start discussing that individual. And if we have somebody that comes through on an ASB4 whose risk is very high, we won't wait for the next panel meeting. We'll call a case conference around that individual, and we'll start action planning about how we're going to help that individual very quickly, because we recognise that things can deteriorate very rapidly, and the impact that it has on somebody's ability to enjoy their home and enjoy their life.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I think from your side of it, that for me is really important, because the missing piece of the puzzle I've experienced has been from the police side, because of the reductions and because of the way they've had to deal with the changes. I mean, the police officers literally being taken off the streets. That issue for us, at least in my experience, has been that there hasn't been the intervention as you describe, particularly on the low level. And it is being focused on the acute, which is absolutely fine. You totally understand that. But when you're dealing with a group of residents who are dealing with low-level ASB, and they aren't getting a response from the police because they're already as stretched as they can possibly be dealing with the acute issues, it's causing tension. And as a member reporting back to yourself, really, I think in terms of where you'll go with your projects and your work, for me, that's something that's pretty important. My final question relates to ex-offenders. Yeah, please do.
I think what that raises is the real value of having our own patrolling team, because they actually do act as the eyes and the ears. And if we're honest about it, these outbreaks of low-level ASB tend to be concentrated in the same areas time after time, which is where we concentrate our patrolling activity. So they really do get inside the community. They know pretty well who's causing the problems and where they live and what they're doing. And a lot of the effectiveness, I think, in reducing ASB within the borough, and it has been very effectively reduced, has been because of the quick intervention, basically picking little Johnny up and taking him home to mum and saying, look, we're giving him a yellow card and this is what's for, now get him sorted out. What used to be called the clip around the ear, until those sorts of things were not allowed anymore. But I think it is the fact that you can intervene quickly, not heavily, just to try and redirect somebody, but it's done in a slightly formal way. That, I think, is a very valuable thing. Of course, you need to follow up on the major cases. It's a different issue and a different question of dealing with, and there's often lots of other underlying issues that need to be dealt with. But it is the work of things like the CTCG, where you're bringing together not just the police, not just our patrol teams, but housing associations, fire service, if it's to do with, and you get arson at certain times of the year, all those other potential people who will sit there and they will look at both specific instances, but they'll also look at patterns. And you start to see, when you look at the number of reports that come in of incidents which have been, it's not been actually formally a complaint on 101 or whatever it happens to be, but it's our own people picking up instances, filing it on the system so they can see them emerging. And that was, you know, we've seen it happen in Brighton Hill, we've seen it happen in South End, we've seen it happen in a number of places. You see it bubbling up before it happens, and you can take action and do the necessary patrolling. And that, I think, is what it's really about. It's being, we can't have bobbies on the beat, but we can have other people in the area, and that's very important. Sorry to interrupt before you got to your final question.
You're very fortunate in Basingstoke to have the CSPOs, and we have actually managed to get a couple of CSPOs who are able to go out and do the ASB4s. So where the police might not be able to attend, they do go out and do the risk assessments.
I've seen that in action in the wards, and it is important. I mean, it was before when it was the community wardens, it was the same as you carried it through. It's always been there in terms of that work, and I think for me that's the short-sightedness of the county and what it's doing. And I think, you know, your commitment, Clive, is fine. We agree with that, and it's important for us in the borough. So in that context, yes, we agree. I think the issue that I've noticed is just it's been the shortness of the police on the ground, the fact that they've not been there in the way they have been previously because of the numbers in the way they've been cut, that has presented an issue. Not that our officers haven't dealt with it or the other authorities have dealt with it. It's the multi-agency bit. In terms of the ex-offenders bit, that is something I am interested in the work you might do with ex-offenders, particularly in terms of you were talking about the multi-agency approach. Because with probation and with other agencies, I've noticed in some cases that has been incredibly difficult. MAPPers being involved, all of it, but actually picking up the issues presented by ex-offenders. Might involve mental health issues, might involve repeat offending, and so on. But also the family and how we deal with the families of ex-offenders, where it may well present as an issue not just for you, but housing as well. I mean, where does that fit into, or does it at all at the moment?
It does, through the IOM programme, the Integrated Offender Management Programme. We work very closely with them in identifying who the cohorts are that are going to pick up. We've managed to get short-term custody offenders included in the IOM pickup. So those that are given a custodial sentence less than 12 months are now being picked up as well, where they weren't being picked up before. There are programmes that Invisible Walls is a programme that works with the families of offenders and how to rehabilitate them back into the family, how to deal with children who are victims of their parent being in prison, and so we do a lot of work there. We obviously have perpetrator programs around domestic abuse. We have substance misuse and alcohol programs. There are issues around dual diagnosis, which are very difficult. If you've got somebody who's got mental health issues coupled with a substance misuse issue, you can't get a service to pick them up because one will say, I won't work with them until their other issue is dealt with, and it's a bit of a horrible cycle that we get ourselves into. But we try to manage, in partnership with other agencies, the impact of those people on the ground, because I can't affect how we get them the services to take them into the service. So we deal with what we can, how we can, and we do a pretty good job most of the time.
Can I say you do a pretty good job, very much so. I think the issue, at least in my experience, has been where those agencies are doing as you describe, and what I've seen is that resulting in street homelessness of ex-offenders, because no agency picks them up, they literally fall through, and it results in issues of concern for the families, and there is an issue to do with probation and the information that is at that level or in the prison that isn't then transferred to the other agencies at release and then transition into the community, because at that stage it isn't transitioned to the community at all, it's been lost and the individuals are lost. And that is a real worry for me because I've seen that in too many occasions.
It's housing is a massive problem. It's a massive problem, and we're working with IOM in the northern area to try and come up with some kind of protocol that will see offenders go into housing. One of the issues around housing is that we need to know early enough when somebody's going to be released. They tend to be released on a Friday afternoon, and if we're not aware that they're being released on a Friday afternoon, they may well be released without appropriate scripting in place. They may well be released without any benefits in place and without somewhere to live, and then they end up back in the same situation when they offend because of their situation. So we are aware. We work with the prisons, we work with the probation service, and I've I've had meetings with the potential companies that are taking over whoever wins the bid for the community rehabilitation company. I've already started having meetings with them about how we want to work with them and what our expectations are, so that they can make their bids accordingly and know what they're coming into.
Councillor Jones.
Chair, just want to talk about this ASB tools and power. I found it quite interesting, in as much as how would it deal with housing association land against highway lands, where we get these problems on the estates. One of the problems I come across quite regularly is the residents get fed up with reporting stuff because they get passed from pillar to post. And most of it's quite low level, but it's important to these people. And you find old vehicles being dumped, well, not dumped actually, people say they own the blooming things, and taking up car parking spaces. It's on housing association land, the police can't get involved, and we go in a merry circle for months. And I just wonder whether this power will give someone the power to get these things removed quicker.
The short answer to that is I can't answer that question until we've got a better understanding of exactly how the powers are going to be implemented. What I can say is that the local authorities will have some power to delegate some of the power to housing associations, which might assist them in dealing with their problems more expediently. The other thing I would say is that neighbour disputes are a massive issue, and we're working on a restorative approaches programme, which we have already been using in Hart, where we will do some restorative conferencing between neighbours, shuttle mediation, to try and broker some kind of agreement that you don't have to like the person you live next door to, but you do have to live next door to them, to see whether, because often they're long-standing niggles, and when you ask people why they're arguing, they don't really know, they just don't like each other, and you can broker arrangements where they get on better. So we do that as well. But with regards to the powers, we know what the powers are intended for, but how they're going to be implemented has yet to be disclosed.
Can I just say, the point I'm trying to make, and thanks very much for the answer, is that I've lost families who've moved away out of my ward, decent families, because of disputes it's taken so long to resolve. And I know you work, I'm not saying you're not working on these things, don't get me wrong, because they do, there's always two sides to every story. But I've lost quite a few families in the past where they've transferred out, or even if they own the houses, sold up and moved on. And that's why I'm really interested in this, in as much as you can have housing association against private, backing onto each other, and these things need sorting. That's where I'm coming from. Thanks.
I think the point of the powers is to try and resolve issues like that. That's why they are more wide-reaching to cover. We talk about untidy gardens, but I mean it can be untidy anything. We do need to see how exactly we're going to be able to implement them and things, but I think the problem that you get, which is what I think Caroline was alluding to earlier on, is that actually you can use the powers, resolve the specific issue, all the gardens are neat and tidy, everything is fine, the arguments still go on between the neighbours because it's residual and it's left there and it's built up as a personal issue, and that's where a lot of the interventions at that level to try and resolve those issues is worthwhile, because those are exactly the kinds of conflicts which result in the higher levels of ASB leading towards actual physical harm, and that's the kind of thing you want to stamp on as quickly as possible. But sometimes actually the only way of resolving it is to move people on.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Reid.
Sorry, thank you. Just listening to that, actually, something has occurred to me. One of the recurring problems we have in my area, I don't want this to sound flippant at all, but we have neighbour disputes based around parking problems. And they can actually become quite intense. I'm thinking of one that's ongoing at the moment, where again, as the leader says, eventually the cause gets lost and it just becomes a general neighbour dispute. is that the kind of thing that you can also intervene on?
With most of the referrals we have into the restorative justice approach are around parking issues, or issues with people leaving dustbins, wheelie bins in places that they shouldn't. We can't resolve allocated parking issues or anything like that, but what we do is try and broker a situation where people tolerate each other and they're a bit more respectful towards each other than they are once they've got into these entrenched situations where they're just doing it to wind each other up, quite frankly. So yes, that's what we use it for.
Thank you. That's actually very helpful. I might actually need to bring you in on something. Thank you for that. I'd just like to also echo Councillor Harvey's thanks, because it has been an excellent report and very detailed. I just wonder whether, because there is so much information in this, it would be possible to share this, so maybe not just with the committee, but perhaps with all members, because I think we'd all find it very helpful. Thank you.
Can I just add something? I think hopefully what's come out of this evening is that you realise that there is an awful lot going on which you probably never ever hear about, and that's exactly as it should be. I mean, we don't want to make the resilience of the organisations that are working and all the activities that are going on pride of place, because it starts to build up the atmosphere that you're literally living in a war zone if you start to talk about it. But I think what you do see is that all levels there's an awful lot of activity, and we haven't even talked about the various other tasking groups that there are that are going on a regular basis, reviewing at a detailed level within the borough exactly what's happening and how we're dealing with specific cases and specific people and other specific issues. What I think we're now beginning to get out of the way that we're moving forward is we're getting much better higher level coordination, and we've seen it in terms of the efficiency, but we didn't do it to actually drive money out of the equation. We did it to get better efficiency, better sharing of best practice across the area. It has helped us to leverage in bigger amounts of money than we could ever have done. We now have a much clearer, as those who were able to come to the meeting last week with the Chief Constable will have heard, there are a lot of pressures on them to change the way that they are able to operate. We need to make sure that we can actually ensure that we're fitting in with the way that they need to operate, but equally we're not leaving gaps in that form of operation. So I think that's all the more imperative that we should be working much more closely together on a wider area basis, without forgetting the need to do all the detailed work and the nitty-gritty on a day-to-day basis. And that's what's going on. It's like, sort of the ducks sailing furiously, paddling under the surface, well, the swans rather, but looking serene as we go forwards with falling crime rates, which is a wonderful picture to paint at the end of the whole thing.
Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Chair. And I also would like to extend my thanks for the report. Very detailed and very good. I want to come on to something the leaders just raised, which is singing our praises. I've got a screen print of the Safer North Hampshire website. Under the latest news, we haven't actually got anything that's Basingstoke-Dean specific, whereas our partners in Rushmore and Hart do. So could we look at ways that we can promote the good work that we're doing through your website? Because there's a link with 2 out of the 3. We just need to bridge that gap with ourselves and say, there is some good stuff coming out of this. We need to show that we're doing it.
We do promote stuff that's going on in Basingstoke. We actually have something coming up on Friday. We're working in Cranbourne School delivering drug and alcohol education and stress management, and there will be an article coming out about the work we're doing in Basingstoke schools. I take your comment on board, and I will go and make sure that Basingstoke has a more prominent view on the website. But I do want to reassure you, we have a communications plan, which is a tripartite plan, which Basingstoke features very highly on and is represented very well at, and all of the local news releases actually form part of that plan.
That's fine, and thank you for letting me know. The reason that it sort of brought to my attention was that in January there was a Safer Rushmore and a Safer Hearts newsletter, but there wasn't a Safer Basingstoke and Dean newsletter.
because we've only just rolled out the newsletter, which is now no longer Hart, Rushmore or Basingstoke, but is Safer North Hampshire.
To follow up on that, I think it is important that we do remember that we are doing very well. If you were there, I don't think you were there last week, but the Chief Constable was very clear in saying that actually he gets more cooperation, better cooperation within Basingstoke and Deane than anywhere else in Hampshire. And the result of that is that crime and ASB is falling faster in Basingstoke and Deane than anywhere else in Hampshire. And I don't think the two are coincidental. And our crime rate has been falling for a long period now because of the closeness of that relationship. And I think that is something we should be shouting about, and I entirely agree with you. We perhaps don't shout about it enough. The trouble is that even though we do, and we send out releases on it, good news doesn't make headlines. And that's always been the difficulty. But we'll keep trying, we'll keep putting it out there, and we'll keep trying to get this across, because actually it's very important to people to feel safe. Particularly vulnerable people in the community need to feel that they are in somewhere where they are not threatened when they go out, they're not threatened when they're at home alone. And the fact that they are not in our borough is a very important factor that we need to reassure them.
Thank you, members. I have no more questions. So if we open up to debate, and I'll just draw the committee back to the recommendations as set out on the paper, which is that the committee notes the outcomes of the first year of operation of Safer North Hampshire, and the committee supports the principle of a merger of 3 community safety partnerships as set out in the report, and notes that the final details of the arrangements will be presented to Cabinet and Council in due course. Is there anybody who wishes to speak? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciating the points made about the scrutiny and the monitoring of everything. I mean, that's fair. I don't think anyone's going to, or I hope no one will necessarily speak against the principles of it. It's necessarily just the continuing monitoring of what's going on to make sure that it is doing the job that we set it up for. I guess my only points I'd like to make, just briefly, in relation to what's been said this evening. For me, particularly with the police, a lot of the concentration on the drugs-related issues is incredibly important. And again, your part in that is key, but also the police's response to the issues that we face. And that for me is a growing and a concerning area of work. And I think, appreciating all your comments, I know you're doing a tremendous amount of work, but I do think that's something that I want to highlight. And then the other issue for me is the police reductions. And I can't let it go without saying that, because you mentioned the police constable, but we're losing 20% of our PCs. Over 1,000 police jobs are going. Now, you're not telling me that isn't something that is a concern. It is a concern. I mean, I talk to people on the street, you talk to residents door knocking, it is an issue. And I appreciate what the leader has said, because where we can fill that gap, it's appropriate. But we won't be able to fill every gap that a police officer would have been able, and their job is to do. And I think that's the issue for me, losing 456 police officers, another 535 staff with another 25% cuts. The police they can't take much more before it will genuinely affect the front line. And that's what the Chief Constable has said quite clearly. I think what was his quote? I got it in his presentation, we're being pushed to the limit. So somewhere someone's got to draw the line and make government realise that. But I just want to say commend again what you're doing, because you are filling a gap. It is important, but we shouldn't forget those other issues that we're facing either.
I just want to come back to the drugs issue. There was a programme called Op Fortress that was developed in Southampton in response to drug-related violence. That programme has now been adopted force-wide and is being funded by the PCC. We do now have drug strategy panels in place. I co-chair those panel meetings, and for the first time we are now doing multi-agency work around drug warrants and arrests and the impact it has on communities, and the police are daring to share with partners, and they are identifying single points of contact for intelligence officers so that partners can be coming back in, because there's absolutely no doubt that the people that are out there working in the community know an awful lot of stuff, and they've had no receptacle for that stuff, and they now have somewhere for it to go, and that intelligence is being used in a very wise way, in my opinion.
Just very quickly, Gary, so colleagues in Southampton report how successful that was and how important it was. So I do welcome that being rolled out for us.
I wanted, if I may, just to add something to what Councillor Harvey was talking about, the police side of it. I mean, it's not my role to defend the police, but I think it was very interesting listening to the Chief Constable last week, that his belief is that they can cope with the current reductions without there being a diminution of the level of service that they provide. It will not be provided in the same way, but he believes that they can get down to the reduced levels of manning without it having a major impact on what they're actually providing. He's also equally clear that they can't go much further. And I think at that stage it will be incumbent on all of us to stand up and be behind them and say, right, we're not putting up with any more of this. You've gone, that's far enough. But no further. But I think at the moment we haven't got that far. And actually what is quite, I think, encouraging in a way, is that it is forcing a service, the police service, who were really quite parochial, quite insular in the way that they operate. They've always have been. It's been their own little closed world. And they're coming out of that now, and they're becoming much more willing to share and to get involved with partners and to be part of a team operation. And I think there's tremendous benefits to be had from that in the way that we will move forward, whether it is making sure that they've got one chief inspector for every council organisation. Certainly we're talking to them about shared accommodation and all sorts of other things that we can do to bring all the teams who are involved in being on the streets together to be much more effective as one overall coordinated group of people. And I think that will be, you know, really a really positive benefit that will come out of the financial situation that they find themselves. But I'd agree entirely with both Councillor Harvey and the Chief Constable, a strange combination to put together, that we can only go so far, and then that will be it.
If I may, can I just say, in picking up your point earlier, Clive, we shouldn't forget, I mean, I go back to the days of Paul Nettle across the road, absolutely across the road, in terms of literally that close to us and the working relationship we have. We have all, as a borough, we have always had that working relationship with the senior police officers in this town. The issues they faced, we've always stood up with them and tried to help them deal with the issues they faced, whether that's the reorganisation of their OCUs and how they've dealt with all that, alongside the numbers of police they've had to deal with, and the reductions in beat bobbies which we've seen. And that has had an impact. You can't deny it hasn't, but what we do is stand with them and try and do the best we can to support them.
Yeah, I think it's actually, it's moved its way down from the senior levels. It was always relatively good at the senior levels. It wasn't as you went further down. And it's been very interesting watching the relationship grow, for instance, between our CSPOs and the the beat bobbies and they were very suspicious of them when they first sort of arrived, and but now when they turn up every morning at the morning tasking meetings, they're operating together, and there is now a very clear interrelationship between them, which is what's creating the effectiveness. And that's like everything, the more you work with people, the more you get to understand them, and the better way that you can work with them, and it's a very good thing.
Thank you for that. And in terms of, you pinched part of what I was, after Councillor Harvey had spoken, I was going to jump in there, but you wish to speak, which is fine. But certainly in terms of the concerns that you raised, for members that didn't turn up last week, it is on the webcast and it would well be worth watching, and perhaps some of your concerns would be alleviated. The Chief Constable's presentation was really good, and it just shows, the robustness of the police force and their commitment to the service that they provide. what I do, it is an important issue, but I don't want to lose sight of what we're here this evening to do, and that is for the committee to support the principle of a merger. And I haven't heard anybody speak against that. It is only in principle. There will be finer detail, which, as it states, will be presented to Cabinet and Council. So can I take it that the committee is in support, in principle, of a merger, and notes the outcomes as well of the first year? Great, thank you. Thank you. That concludes this evening's meeting.